Hey everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today we are going to do the fourth grammar lesson, which is the detective adjective. So this is another adjective lesson that really shows the power of using multiple adjectives. Today I'll be using the Montessori Print Shop's triangles, and I've already sorted them out to see if I have an equal amount of each. And the nice thing about using Montessori Print Shop is that if you do have some missing materials, it's really easy to replace them. You can just print them out. It only costs a few dollars for the templates. And so you get to keep the PDF for that, and you can reprint any missing pieces as you go. And of course, you can cut these out, laminate them, and they're pretty sturdy for the classroom. And I like using them. I used these for when I was in training, mainly because First of all, I'm not great at triangles. I didn't pay attention in geometry class in high school. I did not enjoy geometry class in high school. And when I went to get my Montessori training and I saw all the work that we needed to do with triangles, I thought, geez, I'm going to have to remember what everything is. And I vividly remember being in training and coming up to this lesson and hiding in the back thinking, please do not pick me. Please do not pick me for this lesson. I don't want to do this lesson because I don't like triangles. And if you're like me and you didn't put a lot of effort into learning your triangles in high school or middle school or elementary school, then you might have some apprehension about how to do this grammar lesson, because this grammar lesson really builds on different skills that we're teaching in the Montessori classroom. So if you have not been using triangles, if you haven't introduced your students to triangles, this might be difficult, right? So let's just talk about that problem for a second, because there's probably a lot of people out there that want to do this lesson but don't want to use triangles. And that could be because you're just not comfortable with using these triangles, or because you haven't had time to introduce this subject to your students yet. Now in Montessori, we introduce this around the kindergarten age. And for a lot of elementary schools, triangles are not even part of the subject until later on. So this is a very different concept with Montessori, right? So in Montessori, we have an area called the sensorial area where we have a geometry cabinet, and we start very early on introducing all the different shapes. So this is something that we naturally build on in the Montessori environment that might not be something that you're doing at home in your homeschool group, or if you're doing in a classroom that's not Montessori based. So the nice thing about the detective adjective is that you can use something other than triangles. You can think outside the box and use other materials, and that's going to be perfectly fine. So that's the nice thing, but I will encourage you to try and get into using these triangles. Try to get into the geometry cabinet and introduce these concepts between the ages of 3 and 5, because I'm going to tell you that they can do it. They can learn this. They can tell the difference between an isosceles triangle or a scalene triangle. They can tell the difference between obtuse and acute, and they can tell an equilateral triangle. They can tell the difference between all these things. The only problem that I would see sometimes in the detective adjective game is that sometimes the difference between the different triangles can be very small, and if that's the case, you might want to reduce it down and only have triangles that look extremely different from each other so that it's really easy for your students to discern them. I also want to show you that Montessori Print Shop does offer labels for this lesson. Now, it's nice, you don't have to go and write everything down and print everything down. So from that standpoint, it's really nice. But I am going to point out something that I don't like about the labels through Montessori Print Shop. So for anyone going through AMI training, you're going to understand this. But for everyone else that might not know, these are not supposed to be sentences. We haven't gotten to a point in our grammar lessons where we have introduced capital letters for starting a sentence and a period. We have not introduced all the parts of the sentence yet. And so when we provide this lesson as an AMI teacher, we do not use a full sentence, and we're not going to use a period at the end. But the Montessori Print Shop labels do that, and it will be okay. You know, you'll survive it. It's not ideal, but obviously all of my students have been able to do this successfully. And if you're wondering, can they really read the large yellow obtuse angled scalene triangle? The truth is that most of them can. And there are two reasons why they can read this. One is they can actually read it, right? There are some students that are able to read all of that by kindergarten. However, the more likely thing that's going to happen when they get these labels is that they're going to sound out the very first parts of each word, and they're going to know the words well enough in this lesson that they're going to be able to guess, right? So what they're going to do is they're going to start by sounding out the first part of each word, and that's usually enough for them to guess which word they're looking for, like yellow, right? They start sounding out the yellow. So they're going to be able to get that word just from the first few sounds. And then the same thing for obtuse, right? They're going to get those first few sounds and they're going to be like, oh, that's obtuse. And so they're going to go through this, and some will actually read it, but some will just need to sound out the first few sounds of the word, and they're going to know what it is, because we're only giving them so many choices of words in this lesson. So I would encourage you to use the triangles. And when I've had to take over classrooms that haven't been building on the geometry cabinet, that haven't been teaching the geometry shapes, I will take a week or two to introduce or reintroduce the triangles, give them a week or two to work on it. And then I'll jump into the grammar lesson on detective adjectives. So you might have to go back, do a reminder lesson or a first time lesson on the different triangles. And usually you can get through that pretty competently in the first couple of weeks. And most of my students are able to grasp this pretty fluently in a couple weeks. So go back to this if you have to, reintroduce the triangles if you have to, and then jump back into the detective adjective lesson so that they feel confident when they do this lesson. So that's just kind of the background behind this lesson, a little bit of information behind it. But again, you can really use any material that has a variation in it. And you're going to see why triangles work so well for this lesson. So I'm going to put the link for the Montessori print shop version of this down below so that you can have a link to that. It's really affordable. And also I'll do that for the labels as well if you want to use these. Otherwise, you can go to a Montessori vendor and order this. So like I said, before you can do this lesson, you really have to build on different skills in the classroom with the geometry cabinet, the constructive triangles, and also make sure you're introducing red words or puzzle words like the, right? So that all builds on other skills before you can come to this lesson. And just so you know, when it comes to introducing angles and sides and all of that stuff with the triangles, we do that through the constructive triangles. We'll define what an angle is, what a side is. The parts of the triangle are introduced in the constructive triangles. And then the names of the triangles, the different types of triangles, are introduced in the geometry cabinet. So those are the lessons you have to have before you get to doing the detective adjective. Now, of course, like I said before, you can use alternatives, and they can be any object where there are variations, like you could use colored pencils, and you could use pens, crayons, markers. You could also do this with maybe some paper clips or spools of thread. So just to give you an idea, there are different ways of presenting this lesson. I personally like showing how Montessori did it and how she introduced it, because this is a pretty incredible concept that we often overlook with our students, right? We so often underestimate what our students can do at a young age. And I just want to show you that that this can be done, with very young children. Children in kindergarten, children in first grade can do this lesson. They can identify these triangles. They can tell the difference between all these angles and sides. And I just want to make sure that you realize just the potential of your students. And I'm going to show you the lesson today. I'm going to give you the full lesson, but also at the very end, I'm going to show you a clip from MontessoriGuide.org, and I'm going to show you somebody actually giving this lesson to a young child so that you can see, this isn't something we just talk about. It's not just something that we put into the universe and don't actually do, right? This is a very legitimate lesson that we work on in the classroom. So your students are capable of this. You do have to build on the different skills, but they're very capable of doing this lesson. All right, so as you can see, I have spread out all of my triangles. And so when we start this lesson, we're going to ask our student to spread out all the triangles on a rug. And don't forget, for this lesson, you're going to need your teacher tray that has slips of paper, a pencil, scissors, and I like to have a little protector to write on, and that's just how my training center presented that. So that's what we have for our teacher tray. We're going to be using that. And then we will eventually be using a grammar box. And again, my grammar box is very humble. I don't have a nice fancy grammar box. I use my symbols from the Montessori print shop and cut them out, and I just put them in a box I found at a thrift store. Bear with me, I don't have always the most beautiful setup when it comes to my Montessori materials, but you know, they do cost a lot of money, and I do like using things that are more affordable and things that I think will be easiest to use for other people out there, especially if you're homeschooling and you're on a budget. This type of stuff is a lifesaver, right? You don't want to be spending hundreds of dollars on materials that you're maybe only going to use once. And like I said, at the end of the lesson, we're going to invite our students to use the labels, which I also got from Montessori Print Shop. So the detective adjective is very much going to follow the same pattern that we have been doing. We're going to present the lesson, and then we're going to do the transposition, and then we're going to do the symbolization. So this grammar lesson is very much going to follow that 3-part format. Now, before we begin, I want to go over the control of error. The control of error for this lesson is really just within the child themselves and their ability to understand the triangles. So we're not going to be correcting their work in this one. This is just one that's going to be within the process. As the child develops, as they become more familiar with the grammar concepts, as they become more familiar with the triangles, they're going to be able to discern the differences much more so as they go along. Now, even though this looks like a lot of triangles, I actually did not put out all the triangles that I printed from Montessori Print Shop. This is a little over half the triangles in the collection. And the direct purpose of this lesson is, of course, to show the power of the adjective. And of course, the indirect purpose would be geometry. And the age for this, like I've said before, is around 4.5 to 5 years old. Of course, it's going to be different depending on your environment and the students you've had. And I know that not every student has been introduced to triangles, and that COVID has really made it difficult to stay up to date on a lot of our reading and grammar lessons. So if your student is a little bit older, don't worry about it. So to begin with, I'm going to take out my protector to write on and my slip of paper, and I'm going to get my pencil, and I am going to write something for the student. I'm going to invite my student over, and I'm going to say, you know what? I am thinking of something, and I'm going to write it down on a piece of paper. And when you read what it is, I want you to find it. So at this point, we're going to write the triangle, and notice I have used cursive to write with, because in the AMI Montessori classroom, we always write in cursive, but we read in print. So when we're writing with our student or in front of our student, we are going to use cursive, and I wrote the triangle. So the student's going to read the triangle, and then I'm going to say, can you find the triangle? And so a student will go and they will pick out a triangle, and let's say they can pick any triangle they want. And let's say they pick this triangle, and they bring it back to you, and you'll say, you know what? That's right, that is a triangle. But that's not the triangle I'm thinking of. I'm going to have to give you another hint, another clue to let you know what triangle I'm thinking of. The next clue is the word yellow. Now we're going to show this to our student and say, the triangle yellow. Does that sound right? Is that the way we put it? And of course they'll say no, because we've been doing that transposition, so they know what order this goes in. Say, all right, I need to change this just a little bit. Hold on. And so we're going to cut our words and put them in the right order. So it says the yellow triangle. Can you find the yellow triangle? And at this point we can tell our student, you know, since we know it's going to be a yellow triangle, let's just go ahead and put away any triangle that's not yellow. All right, so let's do that real quick. Okay, so now we have all yellow triangles, and we've asked our student to find the yellow triangle. Let's see. Let's pick this one. And they bring it back to you, and you say, you know what? That is a yellow triangle, but that's not the triangle I'm thinking of. I'm going to have to give you another clue. So my next clue is the word small. Let's read all of our clues so far. The yellow triangle small. Does that sound right? Is that the right order of those words? No, I'm going to have to cut that and put it in the correct place. The small yellow triangle. All right, well, this is not a small triangle. So let's put away any triangle that's not small so that we know which one we're looking for. So let's take away all of our medium and our large triangles and only leave out the small ones. And then Let's see if you can figure out which one I'm thinking of. All right, so now we have 4 small triangles. Which triangle do you think it is? And so when they pick their triangle, they can bring it over to you and they can say, this triangle, this small yellow triangle. And of course, one more time, you will tell them, you know what, that is a small yellow triangle, but that's not the small yellow triangle that I'm thinking of. I'm going to have to write one more clue. So now we've got the small yellow triangle obtuse. Does that sound right? No, we're going to have to change this. So let's put the word obtuse before the word triangle. Okay, so now let's read it. The small yellow obtuse triangle. Alrighty. So we're looking for an obtuse triangle. So we know that if it's an acute triangle, that's not the one we're looking for. So we can put any acute triangles away. Now, we're looking for obtuse. Is this one obtuse? No, that one's a right angle. Since this is a right angle triangle, we can put that away as well. Now, all that we have left are 2 small yellow obtuse triangles. One is an isosceles and one is a scalene. So which one do you think it is? And if they pick the isosceles, you can say, you know what? That is a small yellow obtuse triangle, but that's still not the one I'm thinking of. And so you can give them their last clue. So right here we have the small yellow obtuse triangle scalene. Is that the right order? No, let's switch it. The small yellow obtuse scalene triangle. Now you can also put the word angled in there, obtuse angled scalene triangle. That's fine too. The labels, the printed labels are going to use those if you do Montessori print shop. So it might be good to use the word angled. So the small yellow obtuse scalene triangle. And again, this is where it becomes a little bit hard to tell with some of these, the difference between the isosceles and the scalene. You really kind of have to measure it to notice that there's 3 different sides of the sides. You know, it's very subtle. And so this might be difficult. And that's why I say the control of error is within the child, because, you know, if they get this close but can't discern the difference in those sides, that's understandable, right? Like, this is difficult for an adult to do. Sometimes, you know, they're so close, I have to go and I have to measure them just to make sure it's an isosceles or a scalene, because it's very hard to tell sometimes. And that's not something that my eye is great at discerning, but other people might not have a problem with it, right? So this is why we're not going to get really, really controlling and really correcting in the different triangles. Now, if you ask for the small yellow obtuse scalene triangle and they bring you an equilateral or an acute triangle, you know, all I would do at that point in time is just go back and give those reminder lessons on the triangles later on. I wouldn't correct it in the moment. This really isn't a geometry lesson, right? This is the power of the adjective, to show the power of the adjective and how the adjective really gives us clues as to what we're looking for. And the more adjectives we're using, the more clues we get. And so it is very much a fun lesson in regards to the fact that we're working this as a detective, right? We're giving clues. And that's really the fun part of this lesson. And that's why if you want to switch out the triangles for something completely different in your room, in your household environment, that's perfectly fine. You know, the power of this lesson really can go in a lot of different directions. So like I said, we have 3 different parts of this lesson. We have the presentation, then we have the transposition, and then we're going to do the symbolization last. And so let's go into that transposition part, because that's really the fun part where they start having a lot of fun with the words. And really all they'd have to do is switch it around as much as they would like, make it sound silly, because that's the fun part. So let's switch it around a little bit. Small, the yellow obtuse triangle scalene. Does that sound right? No, that doesn't sound right. Let's switch it up again. Let's see what else we can do. Let's just do a couple. You say small, scalene, yellow, obtuse triangle, the. Does that sound right? No. And so you can keep going, and at the very end, you will ask them if they can put it in the correct order. And this is really where you're looking to see if, once they've transposed it, if they can get it back into an order that makes sense. So the small scaling yellow obtuse triangle. The small, let's do this, yellow obtuse scaling triangle. Or the small yellow obtuse angled scaling triangle, if you want to put the word angled in there as well. And if you decide to do angled, I would probably put it with the word obtuse angled and leave the two words together, because they really are one clue, right? You're not separating that. So if you do use the word angled, write obtuse, angled, and leave it together instead of cutting them all separately. And if you want to during the transposition, you can always cut it separately. So that really is a judgment call. You have to just decide what makes the most sense for your students when it comes to that. And then the final part of this lesson is the symbolization. And so let's get out our grammar box. And let's start by asking the question, what is it that we were looking for in this lesson? What is the object we were looking for? What is that we're talking about here? And what we're talking about is a triangle, right? And we're not going to use the word noun, article, adjective. We're not going to use that with our student. We're just going to say, what is it that we're talking about? And then we're going to remember that this is the symbol for showing what we're talking about right here. We're talking about a triangle. And what is it that told us what kind of triangle that we're talking about? And of course, that would be this symbol right here. We're talking about a small yellow obtuse scaling triangle. So we're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there were 4 things that told us what kind of triangle. Now, we've already introduced multiple adjectives in the previous lesson, in the lesson called logical adjective. So we've worked a little bit with multiple adjectives in the previous lesson. So when we get into this one, it should not be a surprise that we're working with more than one adjective. So the small yellow obtuse scaling triangle. So we've got those symbolized. And there's one left right here, the. And if you remember, that was our first lesson, the lesson on the article along with the noun. And the tells us how many, right? If we're working with just one triangle or many triangles that are exactly the same. And the tells us we're working with one. We were looking for just one triangle, the small yellow obtuse scaling triangle. There's only one in this lesson, and so it's the word the. And of course, we symbolize that with the tiny light blue triangle right there. And that's it. That's the entire lesson, but don't go just yet, because I am going to put a demonstration from MontessoriGuide.org so you can see what it looks like as the teacher works with the student on this, and you can get more of a realistic feel for how this lesson is presented in the classroom environment. So anyways, that's all I have for you today. Stick around for that example from MontessoriGuide.org. Don't forget to like, share, comment on the video, and of course, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.
You're going to use some clues to find out just which triangle I'm thinking of, because I'm thinking of just one. Look at all we have here. There are a lot of triangles right there. Okay. Now, I'm going to write a message for you as to which one I'm thinking about. There's an awful lot of triangles there, aren't there?
Yes.
Just pick any one. Yep. That's a triangle, but that's not the one I was thinking of. I better give you another clue, right? Red triangles too. Why don't we just put away all of the triangles that are not red? That'll help narrow it down, okay? So any triangle that's not red, we're going to put away. not a cute angle, so that'll help narrow it down too. That's a cute angle, yeah. Tuck it away. You found it. You're a detective. Okay. We'll do it again? Okay, great.